Morning, everyone. My name is Father Tom Lynch, and I'm president of Priests for Life Canada. Priests for Life Canada is an association of Canadian Catholic clergy, bishops, priests, and deacons, and lay people who promote and defend the sanctity of human life from conception to natural death. We work to support, inform, and empower Catholic clergy to build the culture of life, and we bring together clergy and all Catholics to fight the culture of death, particularly in the matters of abortion and mercy killing and euthanasia. In addition to hosting this podcast, The Pro-Life Hour, we also produce informative bi-monthly newsletters. We provide clergy homily notes for Sunday Mass readings, provide parishes with free pro-life material as part of the Just for Life program, and we host special congresses and symposia that bring together both clergy and seminarians. As usual, I'm joined by my co-host, the chair of our board, Father John Lemire. Welcome, Father John.
Thanks, Father Tom. Always great to be back with you.
Well, especially because he's back from the sunny south, so that's good. Before I introduce our guest today, let us begin as usual with prayer. Heavenly Father, you fashioned in your image and likeness every man, woman, and child. Give us, we beg you, a keen eye to recognize that image so that respect for all human life becomes our way of life, and that together we defend the very least among us. Grant this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
So today, my friends, we have a great program ahead of us because our guest today is Mike Schouten. Mike has long been the campaign director of WeNeedALaw.ca since its launch in 2012, and he has had a lifelong interest in politics and the sanctity of human life. And his position as campaign director blends these two passions together very well. Aside from directing the day-to-day affairs of the campaign, WeNeedALaw.ca, Mike has been published many times in the National Post, the Vancouver Sun, and the Calgary Herald. He's also been interviewed by Sun News, CBC, CPAC, and various radio talk shows across the country. He lives in Chilliwack, BC. Is that as chilly as we think, Mike? With your wife, Jennifer, and their 6 children. And his overall goal is to vary the status quo by helping to enact the first pro-life law that this country has seen in almost 30 years. His ultimate goal is that we here in Canada will see full legal protection for all preborn children. Welcome, Mike.
It's certainly good to be back with you, Father
Tom. We would like to really deal with a number of things in this program today, but it's always good to have background, I think, on our guests. So could you share with us a bit about how you became involved in the pro-life movement?
Sure, yeah. It's I've always been pro-life. I grew up in a Christian family that very much valued life, both the life of born human beings and the life of preborn human beings. And as I grew into my teen years and then got married and started having children.
Could you speak up a little bit, Mike? Right.
Sure. As I got married and we started having children of our own, the whole aspect of being pro-life and what that meant really took on a new meaning. And then my background, as some of your guests may know, is in horticulture. I didn't grow up working in politics or working in the pro-life movement, but I actually grew up growing plants in greenhouses. But throughout that time, I was always involved in politics, more the weekend warrior style, evenings and just helping out on campaigns, helping get alliance candidates elected back in those days, and then Conservative Party candidates. And one of the reasons why I was so motivated to get good, solid people elected was because of the fact that we needed changes in the political realm as it regarded protections for preborn life. And throughout that time period, I became somewhat disillusioned to the fact that politics can actually change this. The whole aspect of, does law follow culture or does culture follow law? So those kind of conversations and thoughts I was wrestling with. And at a certain point in there, an organization, a national advocacy organization called ARPA Canada, which stands for the Association for Reformed Political Action, they approached me and asked me if I would be interested in working full-time on a public awareness campaign. We didn't really have an idea of what it would look like at that time, but the motivation there was we need more people working full-time in the pro-life movement. So after careful consideration, my wife and I left the security of working in the for-profit industry, in the greenhouse industry, and began working for the not-for-profit organization ARPA Canada. And during the first 6 months or so, we really developed the We Need a Law campaign and then launched it, as you indicated in your introduction, in 2012. and we've been now almost 5 years advocating for protections for preborn children and really trying to engage the grassroots in that process.
So maybe for our listeners, you can either remind or inform them now for the first time really about what weneedalaw.ca is.
Sure, yeah, it's a public awareness campaign with a very specific mission. Our mission is to mobilize and persuade, really, our political leaders to pass laws that protect children before birth. And we know that in order for that to happen, we need to mobilize Canadians. So we're very focused on the grassroots side of it, but we're also focused on direct advocacy to our government, to those in authority over us.
But let's be perhaps even more basic. Does Canada have any laws that are existing right now on the books that would protect preborn children?
No, actually, Canada is the only country in the entire world that has zero legal protections for children before birth. We sit in the company of no one when it comes to how we view legally children before they're born. And this is actually one of the strongest talking points we have, and the reason is because most Canadians think we do have protections. When we go out in the streets and do some of our grassroots projects that we'll probably talk about in a few minutes, when we go out there, the number one response from Canadians is, "Are you serious? There's no law whatsoever? I thought you could only have an abortion in the first trimester, or only if the woman's health was in danger." So these are the responses that we're getting. But the reality is, ever since 1988, since the Supreme Court of Canada struck down Canada's existing abortion regulations at that time, since then we have had nothing. So this essentially means that an abortion is legal at any point during the pregnancy for any reason whatsoever.
But part of the difficulty, I think, is that certainly, let's say, with late-term abortions, people will often bring up the health of the mother to say, in effect, although they don't say it, in effect, either we have this abortion as tragic, and I put that in quotation marks as it is, or the mother will die. Isn't that sometimes a perception, or certainly what is being put out there?
That is given as from pro-choice or pro-abortion advocates. That is the response that they will give, that abortion needs to be legal because of those reasons, as you just outlined, the health of the mother, and often they'll pair that up with the health of the child, the health of the fetus. So here we get into conversations about eugenics. We get into conversations about whether or not women do in fact die because they can't have an abortion, right? So I think what your listeners need to know, though, is that in Canada today, it is very hard to ascertain whether those reasons are actually accurate, whether those reasons have any merit to them, and why that is the case is because in Canada we don't have very solid statistics at all. So we don't know the reasons why a woman would seek out a late-term abortion. We have anecdotal evidence, and that pops up every once in a while, where a woman desires to have an abortion at 30 weeks, for example, and she has a hard time finding a hospital that's willing to facilitate that request of hers. And then it makes the news, and the pro-choice advocates, they'll get upset because this woman's right to security of person was being threatened because she couldn't get an abortion at 30 weeks. But this is only anecdotal evidence. When it comes to actual statistics provided either by Health Canada or the Canadian Institute for Health Information, then we can't find those reasons. They're not cited. They're not given, and that also is unique to Canada. In other jurisdictions, it's very easy to track why women are having abortions, at what stage they're having abortions, what age the woman is when she's having an abortion, etc. But here in Canada, there's a whole lot of censorship going on, a whole lot of secrecy around this, and the government actually likes that because it makes it very challenging for people who advocate for preborn children. It makes it very challenging for them to even know what to advocate for when you're living and operating in this kind of a vacuum of information where it's very hard to know exactly what the status quo is.
Father John?
In light of all of this, Mike, we know that you've been crisscrossing the country doing various speaking engagements, and just recently you were in Ontario to raise awareness to some of these issues. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that Ontario tour and what you did and where you went and some of the issues that were raised?
Sure. Yeah, it's one of the joys of this job is getting out into various parts of Canada and speaking to everyday Canadians about this status quo and about how they can be a part of making the change. So we were recently in Ontario, and the reason why we held a tour in Ontario was because we're involved in a court case that's very specific to Ontario. So the background here, and some of your listeners might know this, but the background here is that in January of 2012, the government of Ontario, they slipped in an amendment to the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. So this act is it's something that every province has, and essentially it guarantees access to government information, and it also protects you and my private and personal health information. So this act was changed in 2012, where the government slipped in an amendment, and I'll quote it just so your listeners really realize what's going on here. It says, "This act does not apply to records relating to the provision of abortion services." So this is one healthcare procedure that they have outlined in the Act to which the Act does not apply. So your listeners might be wondering, what does this mean in practical terms? Well, what it means is that if you or I or a blogger or somebody from the media sends in a Freedom of Information request to the government asking, we'll pick one example, asking how many 14-year-old girls in Ontario have had an abortion in the year 2015. This is a number that many different advocacy groups could make use of. Everyone from those who develop sex ed programs to those who are concerned about the health and welfare of teenage girls in Canada. That information they are not allowed to give you because of the amendment that the Government of Ontario placed on this act. So we believe that it's a censorship law, but we believe that it also violates our constitutional right to freedom of expression because they are censoring certain information. And in 2014, ARPA Canada, the organization that I work for, we partnered with a blogger from Ottawa, Pat Maloney, and we filed a lawsuit against the Government of Ontario in which we are asking essentially a judge to review this portion of the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act and asking whether or not that is unconstitutional.
And?
Well, this case was heard on February 1st in Ontario Superior Court in Ottawa, and prior to that, we wanted to get out on the road and have a tour which had essentially a threefold purpose. One was that this is in fact happening because most people weren't aware that the government was censoring this information. Secondly, how censoring it impedes pro-lifers from doing their work properly. And then thirdly, what the residents of Ontario could do about it. So we visited 9 different cities over the course of 11 days, and it was a very encouraging tour because we brought our message to people who had not heard it before. People became optimistic that we can incrementally make changes, not only to our abortion legislation, but also by taking a stand against this censorship from the government. And thirdly, they're now plugged into our efforts and can help us build support and mobilize more Canadians so that our political leaders can no longer ignore preborn human rights.
So what's your take on the actual legal case, however? Do you think it was, from the initial questioning or anything, do you think that it had some possibility, some legs?
Well, it's a very interesting case because it's the first time that a case like this has been brought against the government, a constitutional case as to why the government is violating freedom of expression. So it's one of these situations where, as a judge, and we can only guess what the judge is going to rule, but as a judge, do you want to be the first one to rule in favor of somebody who's filing a constitutional challenge against the government that hinges on freedom of expression? So that's one of the factors that's at play. The reports we have from the court hearing on February 1st is that it could go either way. Our lawyers, who were very invested in this, as well as the Ontario lawyer, both did very, very good jobs of defending their position. And, now it's up to the judge, and we likely won't hear anything for the next 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, it does take a long time to wend its way. Father John?
Mike, are there other examples in Ontario where that type of medical information is restricted, or is it just specifically to abortion?
Yeah, So to answer your question, it is only for the procedure of abortion. For no other medical procedure is there specifics in the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act that would exclude information from being released to the public. Now, as I mentioned, the Freedom of Information Act, it has two purposes. The second one is to protect our personal and private information. You and I would not want our health information to be put up on a website for everybody to see. But that's not what anybody is asking for. Nobody's asking for personal health information. They're simply asking for numbers pertaining to a specific procedure.
Exactly, as we would do with cancer patients, or how many people had other types of surgeries done. None of that is confidential information. All it simply is statistics.
Yeah, you're right. It's statistics, and we use them all the time to develop good healthcare policy. We use them to develop regulations. For example, take infants in seatbelts and what kind of car seats they should use, and at what age should they move from the little car seat to the booster seat and then to the regular seat. Well, all of those decisions are determined by the rate of accidents and deaths and injuries as they are caused to infants through motor vehicle incidents. And because we know that and we can find that out, then car manufacturers, car seat manufacturers, governments can put in the proper protocols and regulations to ensure the safety as best they can. So these kind of things are used all the time. Whether it's that or knee replacements or blood pressure for people who have smoked for 5 years of their life or have smoked for 10 years of their life. So very detailed information can be ascertained, and that helps develop good policy. But when it regards the killing of preborn children, all of a sudden everything has to be hidden. And I think you and I and your listeners have a pretty good idea of why they want to hide that information. And it really is, and I've said this to many people, it's really their last weapon. It's the last weapon that they can use to try to defend their worldview, and that is simply censoring us from promoting or speaking about or advocating for our worldview. And I think
exactly, just trying to simply silence us, and if we don't know the numbers and if it doesn't become real, then people won't be concerned about issues like this.
Yeah, if we don't know what's happening, why would anybody be concerned about it, right?
Well, the same as not releasing the various sites of where abortions are being done. That's another side.
Mm-hmm. Mike, you said this case is specific to the province of Ontario with their legislation. What's happening across the province with their legislations, and are there similar things happening?
Well, Ontario is really the only province that has this specific measure, this statute, in their Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. BC has something that could be viewed as similar, although it is far more or far less restrictive than this one in Ontario. So, yeah, that's another reason why we simply focused in here in Ontario, because we really couldn't take a case like this into, for example, Manitoba or Alberta, because no such legislation exists in those provinces.
And if there is no legislation then that exists, are those statistics then available?
Yes, certainly. In those provinces, you can, for example, as I said earlier, if you submitted a Freedom of Information request asking for how many teenagers secure abortions in this province in a certain year, then you would be able to receive that information.
On a practical note, however, it's interesting that with within the Ontario context, one doesn't have to. One can't rely on any of the other parties to pick this up, right? And be able to sort of champion the cause, right?
Well, it's a very good point that you bring up, and the organization I work for is nonpartisan, but we encourage people to get involved in the political realm, and one way to get involved is by asking your member of parliament, whether he or she is Liberal, NDP, or PC, what they think about this, because you're dead right that it shouldn't have to take an advocacy organization filing a legal challenge in court to have this overturned. It should take the opposition. I mean, this is what the opposition is for. In the Western parliamentary system, the opposition is supposed to hold the government accountable. But all too often we find the opposition is unwilling to do that, or they have the same view that speaking about abortion and the advancement of preborn human rights, that's simply a political liability, and we're not going to go there. And that, unfortunately, that's really what has transpired in Ontario over the past number of years, where the opposition refused to hold the government to account when they implemented this censorship provision. And that's the desired course of action. But because they have failed to do that, they're not doing that. We felt that there is no other avenues that we can take other than filing a court challenge against the government of Ontario.
So perhaps we can look at a couple things. So what have we been learning from the statistics that are available in other provinces regarding abortion?
The rate of abortion in Canada has remained the same for about the last 10 years. The numbers that are reported mostly through CIHI, which is the Canadian Institute for Health Information, those numbers, if you just look at the notes that they give before they release these statistics, those numbers seem to be dropping. But the reason why they are dropping is because things like this in Ontario, where the numbers aren't being reported accurately, but also Quebec and BC, they don't have mandatory reporting for clinics, so the hospitals will report, but the clinics won't report all of the numbers. So when we look at them a little bit closer and do a little bit more digging, we see that the numbers have pretty consistently remained around 100 to 105,000. Now, one thing that we should know is that because of the introduction of medical abortions in Canada, we're not sure how those numbers are going to be tracked and how many abortions would be regarded as the medical abortions, those ones done via the RU486 pill. So we think the numbers are just going to go up now that pill has been introduced. But we're not sure yet as to how those are going to be reported.
I don't know if they'll even be recorded. Period. I mean, yeah. I think that's being realistic. I think that's one that we have to look at, that they would be seen as pharmaceutical alone, and that would be it.
Could very well be that they're not reported as an abortion, but we still would be able to find out how many women went for a prescription for an RU486 pill and try to find out the numbers that way. But it will make it a lot more difficult for us to do so.
Right. Yet another way to sort of hide it, normalize it and hide it. Yeah. Father John?
So as you were saying, Mike, the case has been presented then to the courts, and now we're anticipating a ruling perhaps maybe in 6 to 8 months from now. So I guess it's just a question of us waiting and praying for the wisdom of the judge and the system that would kind of rule in our favor and protect our constitutional rights. Perhaps we can move on to another issue. The last time you were actually on our show, we were discussing a private member's bill, Bill C-225, Molly and Casey's Law. Can you kind of inform our listeners of what's happened? A lot has happened since that last interview that we did with you.
Yeah, it was 2016 was a very interesting and busy year for us. We had the very good fortune of working with MP from Saskatchewan, Kathy Wagenthal, when she introduced Bill C-225. as you said, otherwise known as Cassie and Molly's Law. And we activated the grassroots. There were literally tens of thousands of emails being sent to Parliament. We also conducted a pretty aggressive postcard campaign. It was about 30,000 postcards that were specific to this bill were mailed to the House of Commons. And then we also engaged in an active telephone campaign, and this was ongoing, where groups of people would volunteer to make calls to MPs to their offices, and that was ongoing throughout the course of time that the bill was being debated. So the bill was debated for the first time last May, so May 2016, and it came up for second reading in October of 2016, and then it was voted on after second reading, and that vote was unsuccessful in seeing the bill move to the next stage where it would go to committee and be discussed there. It was a very interesting but also emotionally exhausting road, not only for Kathy Wagenthal but also for the family that she was working with, the family of Cassie and Molly. So this is a fellow by the name of Jeff Durham. He was the father of Cassie, as well as Molly's grandmother, Nancy Cake, and they were involved in all aspects of this right from day one. They had got together with Kathy Wagenthal, and they very much worked together in advocating for this bill. I was with Jeff Durham and Nancy Cake in the House of Commons when the bill was voted on, and it was very disappointing to see. We were sitting across from the government, and to see them one by one vote against this, even though you could almost, it was almost a visceral feeling that they were wrestling with this. They knew that it was the right thing to do, but they also either had been told by the Prime Minister's office or the government whip that they had to vote against this private member's bill. And the main reason why they did so, a very constant theme we heard from those who voted against it, was that if we vote in favor of this, it's going to reopen the abortion debate in Canada. So that was very disappointing. It was a common sense piece of legislation that would not have affected abortion whatsoever. It simply would have said that if somebody causes harm or commits a criminal act against a pregnant woman, who that person knows is pregnant, and through that course of action injures or kills her preborn child that she has chosen life for, then there would be additional charges that could be laid against that person. So it was a common sense piece of legislation that was intended by Kathy Wagenthal to bridge the gap between pro-lifers and pro-choicers and provide some protection for those preborn children that women have chosen life for. So it was disappointing when the bill died because it could not receive enough support at second reading. But we remain optimistic that this can be a launching pad for further initiatives, for initiatives that could be very similar to Cassie and Molly's Law, or other initiatives that will again force our politicians to debate preborn human rights at one level or another.
Isn't one of the difficulties, though, Mike, with this that you have to be careful that it can't be the same law exactly? It's got to be in some way substantially different within each parliament?
Yes, that is true. So, for example, next month another MP would not be able to introduce a very similar law. They would rule procedurally that, well, this type of bill and the subject matter of it has already been debated in this parliament, so therefore we're not going to allow it to proceed and be placed on the order paper. But that does not exclude something from planning right now already for 2019 and introducing it as soon as the next parliament sits. Right.
And the other aspect is, I think, as I'm sure Father John would follow through, and I'll leave that with you, John. What are the next steps?
Yeah, so moving forward then from this bill and some of the other initiatives, what are some of the things that We Need a Law is looking at to continue to build a culture of life in Canada?
I think so. We've been around for 5 years now, and our initial mission, which still is part of our core mission, is to build that groundswell of support amongst everyday Canadians. What we've observed is that while there are literally millions of Canadians who disagree with the status quo and would be supportive of protections for preborn children at some stage, it really, what's going to change things is when politicians start introducing laws that will protect preborn children. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that if there was 1 million people sending emails to their MPs asking for laws that protect preborn children, that would not guarantee that the government would introduce something. Essentially what it's going to take is people like Kathy Wagenthal, who have it on their hearts to do something to change this pathetic status quo in our country and introduce a private member's bill that, while it might not pass, it will continue the conversation and it will force politicians to keep talking about this, and it will allow the media to discuss it and Canadians to rally around something, to rally around a piece of legislation. So coming off of the defeat, if you will, of Kathy and Molly's law, we feel that it's very important that another private member's bill is introduced very soon, so that the pro-life movement itself doesn't, get into this state again where there's some apathy growing and discontentment, and this is never going to change. We want to avoid that, and one of the best ways to avoid that is to have another piece of legislation introduced that will, again, allow everybody to focus on talking about the status quo and why is Canada the only country with no legislation whatsoever. Allow us to bring out those talking points again. And, the goal is that the day will come when it will become self-evident as a country that this status quo, which allows abortion on demand throughout all stages of pregnancy, is not acceptable. And we want our government to pass laws that protect children at some stage of pregnancy.
So what are some of the initial steps there, Mike, that would have to be taken to do the groundwork, and to be somewhat redundant, to do the groundwork so that such a law would be able to have its maximum impact, or at least the discussion of it would have a maximum impact?
I think in order for that maximum impact to be reached, we need to do a more adequate job of engaging different sectors of the culture. So what I'm thinking here is university campuses. These are the breeding grounds for ideas and the debating of ideas. We need to do a better job of getting those university campuses, and especially those hard-working pro-life clubs, to be focused on a specific piece of legislation. We also need to have people throughout the country who are equipped to defend why Canada should have protections for preborn children, and why, for example, an international standards law, why that is something that most Canadians support. So we need to have those people not just willing to speak to the media, but adequately trained to bring forward a message that is consistent with what everybody else is saying about a certain piece of legislation. We need to be working with physicians groups who know full well that at certain stages of pregnancy, fetuses feel pain, that after 20 weeks it is completely inhumane to abort a preborn child simply on that basis, that the pain is intolerable. People who are equipped to do that in the medical community. And we also need politicians who are equipped to speak to this, politicians who can do more than simply saying, I believe life begins at conception and goes through till natural death. Well, that's well and good, but we need them to be able to properly advocate for how we begin taking steps and what those steps are and why those steps are necessary at this time. Mm-hmm. So there's different spheres in our culture that need to be better equipped at bringing forward this message, and why, for example, an international standards law that would bring us into line with every other country, why that is necessary, and why we can do this as a country, both constitutionally as well as politically.
So really what I'm hearing from you is I think we have to be supportive of a variety of these different legislative initiatives and not lose heart just because, shall we say, one door has been closed under one particular government in one province, or even on the federal level, that there are different avenues that are open to us. One that came up as a matter of just sort of debate a few weeks ago was the reestablishment of the court challenges program by the Trudeau government. And I mean, it's obvious that the last time this was around, it was a vehicle for left and fairly left-wing causes, right? I just wonder, is there any possibility that with the so-called independent panel that would review these cases, if some of our issues could be able to be brought forward?
I think it's certainly something worth looking at, Father Tom. My initial reactions to these kind of things are, you know, if we try to make use of them, then are we, by doing so, legitimizing them, right? I don't support the court challenges program. I think it's money that the government doesn't have the responsibility or authority to hand out to people. This is Canadian taxpayers' money. I think the government is well outside of their realm of responsibility in doing so. But nevertheless, as you said, they're reinstating that. Now, should we make use of that and thereby legitimize it? So that would be one question I would have. As far as you know, whether or not we could both principally as well as effectively use those funds to challenge some of these things, that's something that I haven't looked at in detail, but it is an interesting thought, and I'm sure that pro-life lawyers and pro-life advocacy groups would be looking at whether or not they could avail themselves of those funds.
Those are, shall we say, some of the more overtly political. Some people are good with that, and we want to encourage more to be. But you also have a very interesting public action as well with your flags program. Do you want to just speak briefly about that to our listeners?
Sure. It's as I said earlier, a big part of our focus is engaging the grassroots, and it's not always easy to find ways and means in which the grassroots can engage. I mean, we can ask them to send emails to their MP, and many of them, thousands of them, do that. But it's a very simple action item, and people are, you know, their response when you ask them again is, well, I did that already, and it didn't change anything, so why would I do that again? So we're firm believers in the philosophy that action produces more action. So in 2015, we launched what's just become known as the flag display. We launched it on Parliament Hill with 100,000 pink and blue flags. We had about 150 volunteers come out to plant all these flags. And then throughout the course of the entire day, hundreds and hundreds of conversations take place, obviously, because people are walking up to these flags wondering what they're for and why they've all been planted in this grass. And since then, since 2015, we've used this flag display in different forms over 50 times. So this has been used on university campuses. Local pro-life groups use it. And they essentially, and I welcome your listeners to also email us at info@weneedalaw.ca if they would like or are interested in facilitating one of these flag displays. We have them in 100,000 format or in the 10,000 flag format.
Don't think small.
No, it's a very exciting initiative, and I'll just give you an idea of how it plays out in a community where there's a lot of pro-life people who don't really know what to do. So we were last fall in Steinbeck, Manitoba. So this is considered the Bible Belt, if you will, of Manitoba. Most of the people there are pro-life. They have a pro-life MP. But they become a bit disheartened because nothing seems to change. They have these views, and they have an MP who has these views, but nothing seems to change, and there's nothing they can do, nothing more they feel they can do. So we came to Steinbeck, and a group of people there wanted to do the flag display, the 100,000 flags. And by the end of the day, that entire community was energized because these people, for the first time in a long time, they were able to do something. They were able to come out and physically plant the flags and talk to some of the local media spokespeople, talk to their neighbors who they might not even have known were pro-life, who also came out to help plant the flags. And it was a huge public demonstration, a very respectful public demonstration as to the tragedy of abortion and how grave this injustice is when you see an entire hill in a park covered with pink and blue flags, each one representing one abortion every single year in Canada. So that's what the flag display has accomplished and will continue to accomplish, we think, for the next couple of years as more and more community groups decide that this is something they want to do in their town or their city to help make a difference and help really get the whole community to focus on this injustice and really how great it is.
Yeah, we have to go outside of the regular media outlets which have been blocking us. And, that's what I think a lot of the media, the old media, don't get is that, there are other ways to do that. And I think this is an extremely interesting and effective way of doing it. I was in Kelowna, BC, now about 2 years ago come the spring, and they were talking about it. It had been done just about 2 weeks before, and they were all still talking about it. It was done on a traffic circle, and boy, did it get attention. So I think it's something that, okay, you don't want to be the sort of person that wants to talk to an MP either by face or whatever, but you can plant a flag.
Yeah, and when it comes to grassroots activism, that's what we're finding. There's people with different gifts in different areas. Some people just like to write a check and support this work.
And that's good, too.
That's great, right? We need those people. Other people like to go and visit their MP. They have a very good gift of conversing face-to-face, and they're very confident in the pro-life apologetic, etc. Other people who are just they're just hands-on. They just want to do something. So they help build a sign or plant flags or organize the flag display, right? You need the volunteers to get out. You need to give them some food throughout the day, etc. So there's many different gifts that contribute to bringing this message out, and the flag display has just added an entire new group to that. Those practical people who are now excited that they also can participate in this struggle against the injustice of abortion in a very visible and yet respectful way.
In the midst of that, how can we use the grassroots then to become more energetic in the midst of this?
I'm convinced that one of the primary means of energizing the grassroots is when private members' bills or motions are introduced in Parliament, because for them that's not a reward, but that's a result of the work that they've been doing in the various places across this country. That, okay, the government is listening, or one person at least is listening, and they've introduced something, and now we have something to push for again, right? So it goes in these waves, and we really saw that with the introduction of Cassie and Molly's law. It had been, we're going back a few years here, but it had been 2012 was the last time that any piece of legislation dealing with preborn children had been introduced, and that was Mark Warwa's motion on sex-selective abortion. So, excuse me, we have all these people, tens upon tens of thousands of people who are pushing for something for protection of preborn human rights, and then Cassie Molly's law is introduced, and all of a sudden they have a really tight focus for that time period. And they feel like, hey, we're getting somewhere. And yes, there is a bit of a letdown when that bill doesn't receive enough support at the vote. But then it's about, okay, what's next? Let's start working on the next initiative so that everybody has something to push for again, so that the media has something to talk about, and so that politicians have to debate this again and again and again. So that really, it works in that cycle. We need the politicians doing something, we need the media to be reporting on it, and we need the grassroots to be pushing for it. So our purpose right now in the interim, when there is no bill sitting on the order paper, is that we need to keep encouraging the grassroots to do the things they've been doing and to find new and innovative ways to do that, so that when a bill is introduced, everybody can engage in a very quick and efficient manner and begin pushing for support for that bill.
There is another aspect too, and I always encourage our listeners to remember that, they're hearing this via a quote new media. So it's to be able to understand that the new media is having more and more effect, and that interaction with the social media can be extraordinarily effective when it comes to political change. So not to ignore it, to go around and to actually say, okay, this is really what we want, and we're going to open up new avenues and new voices to be able to achieve it. Right?
Yeah, you're so right, Father Tom. The new media, and especially social media, things like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, those really are, as in the days of Gideon, those are our trumpets today. Those help us to expand our reach incredibly. They help the pro-life movement. And
well, I'm going to steal that line. Is that your line about Gideon? Because it's a good one, and I'm going to steal it.
Yeah, you can steal it. No, I actually referred to that often in our recent Ontario tour, how people need to get plugged in with us on those means, and with groups like yours. And Tom Dow, who works with you, I had a very nice lunch with him, and we talked about this very same thing as well, how we can sound a whole lot louder than we actually are because social media is our trumpet. That's really maximizing our message and getting.
So I want to say to our leaders to remember how important something is just as simple as your own being on Facebook or Twitter. The fact that if you are reposting something on Facebook, it's a geometric impact. And you say, oh, who am I sitting, in Kempville, or whatever. If you're on Facebook, for instance, and you repost, you have no idea how far that goes. It can be very, very effective.
The page, obviously, that we manage, and I'm sure you guys manage a page as well.
Yes.
You can see the analytics, and you can see that when more shares happen, that post is viewed by tens and tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people, depending on the post. So
when you consider that local newspapers have basically disappeared, this is really effective when it comes to being able to get information out. So I keep saying to people, yes, you can do something. You can do something right from where you are, and that's very effective.
Yeah, it's.
So I think we'll leave it there, Mike, and we would really strongly encourage our listeners to go to weneedalaw.ca. How else can they contact you? Some phone numbers, perhaps?
Sure, they can contact us, either by email, info@weneedalaw.ca, or they can contact us via our toll-free number. It's 1-866-410-9625.
Wanted to give that again?
It's 1-866-410-9625.
And they can go to the Priest for Life Canada website, and we'll link to that as well. So we encourage people to find out more about it, and even to share those links with the people around them, to be able not just to get the word out, but to be able to assist you in your ongoing work of activating people in the movement here in Canada. So thank you for joining us today, and as always, Mike, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. We really wish you God's continued blessing upon this important work. For our listeners, I'd like to make you aware that supporting Priests for Life Canada is open to everyone, clergy and laity alike. Because we're not underwritten by any organization, we rely on the generosity of all our listeners and of all Catholics. Please consider making a donation to Priests for Life Canada for today. And if you wish to donate, you can do so on our website at www.priestsforlifecanada.com. That's all one word, priestsforlifecanada.com. Or by telephoning us at 1-888-300-2007. That's 1-888-300-2007. Priests for Life Canada is a registered charity, and as such can issue income tax receipts for all donations. We'd also like to send you out our newsletter that we produce 6 times a year. It'll keep you informed about pro-life issues across Canada, such as we've talked about today, and even more. And now let's end our program with a prayer. God of life, we ask for your power and might, your wisdom and justice, for through you authority is rightly administered, laws are enacted, and judgment is decreed. Assist us with your spirit of counsel and fortitude, and that the leaders of our nation may always seek the ways of righteousness, justice, and mercy. Grant that they may be enabled by your powerful protection to lead our country with honesty and integrity. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. That pretty much sums it up. Thanks again, Mike and Father John. Please check us out on Facebook and Twitter, and visit our website at priestforlifecanada.com to see all of our latest news. God bless. Okay, John? John?